and welcome to another episode of Hames Hot Mic, sponsored by Simpson Notaries. In these next episodes, I'm going to be branching out to look at some regional issues. The first up is going to be transportation. So after this quick break, I'll be right back with my guest, former Langley Mayor, Rick Green. Welcome back. My guest today is Rick Green. Rick was the mayor of Langley Township from 2008 to 2011, has since become an outspoken advocate for the reactivation of passenger service on the old Interurban train line that runs between Chilliwack and Surrey. Prior to being elected, the mayor was an elected alderman in Delta and has a professional career that spans everything from owner management positions in grocery retail to financial services. And like anyone, it seems, who gets involved in local government or local issues, Rick has also a long history of involvement in community organizations. Welcome, Rick.
Thank you very much, Clint.
You know, I know we want to talk about rail, and that's the main reason I've got you here, but I can't resist, as a fellow toiler in the vineyard of local government, I've always had a burning question about Langley. In 1980, the city of Chilliwack and the township of Chilliwack amalgamated. It was seen finally as the right thing to do. Maybe a decade or so later, Abbotsford and Matsqui, in a similar situation, amalgamated. And I think everybody at that time thought, okay, well, the dominoes are dropping, Langley Township and Langley City are going to be next. It never seems to happen. What's the story of the two Langleys, and why do you think it's never going to happen?
Well, Glenn, it goes back many, many decades, back to the days of Langley Prairie, and the municipality, the municipal council of the day, was made up primarily of the farming community, rural community, and what have you, because it wasn't a significant downtown core. But over a period of time, the downtown core, which is sort of Langley City as we know it today, became more significant. And anyway, the business community wanted streetlights. And the council of the day said, absolutely not. It's not going to happen. Well, that led to the request for a referendum. They held a referendum, and the rest is history. They became Langley City.
So it used to be one municipality, and then their history is that they decide to separate because they need streetlights and the farmers don't want to pay.
That's right. And if you were to do a check today, like every election, it does come up as an issue, but a very short-lived issue.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, the city of Langley wouldn't vote for a referendum by all accounts, and the township of Langley would. But it's going to take two to tango, so I can't see it happening, certainly not in my lifetime.
So one day when a mayor candidate comes along with a good idea in the city about amalgamation and can find a way for it to make some sort of financial sense, that it may happen, but we may not be around to see it.
That's right. I think that's probably more of the case.
Well, thank you for that. It's always been of interest to me. Now, Rick, you were mayor 2008 to 2011. When did the interest in the old Interurban line peak for you? How did you get involved in that project?
Well, it's interesting. I really got involved in 2007 with a local group called Valtac. And, you know, the more I looked at it, the more I thought about it. And I mean, I go back, I've lived here, born and bred Vancouver. So I know about the Interurban. My mom used to use it and everything else. So I sort of felt it rather reasonably intriguing. Having said that, as I got more involved in the thing, so fast forward to 2008, I was running for mayor. I got elected. And one of the things that always disturbed me was the volume of heavy rail that was going through the Langleys, through that Pratt-Livingston corridor called the joint section. It's not that we could stop it, but what influence did we as a municipality have on whether it was whistle cessation, environmental issues, just traffic issues, all those different things. What control, if any, did we have? So I went into an in-camera meeting. It was early in February of 2009, asked the question, of which the CAO said, you know, he said, we had our lawyers do a study on this back in 2005. So we went and got the study and we reviewed it. And it was, as legal opinions go, it was sort of vanilla pudding, as I put it. It didn't really say a heck of a lot, and the long and the short of it is we probably couldn't have much influence over heavy rail going through the Langleys. Except for one section. It said, it sort of stated an opinion subject to what's in the master agreement. And I said, well, what master agreement? What are you talking about? Well, we don't know. It just refers to a master agreement. Apparently, there's a master agreement. BC Hydro did not know about it. CP Rail won't tell us anything about it. I said, well, that's ridiculous. So anyway, that's fine. I finished off the meeting and adjourned the meeting, and I went into my office and made 3 phone calls. And the next day, the infamous brown envelope showed up with a copy of the master agreement in it. It's about a 108-page document between CP Rail and the BC government, or BC Hydro actually at the time. Which is effectively the BC government. So, and it had to do, the master agreement dealt with this joint section, which is where the flyover comes over Rawlins and Crescent and joins up at the Interurban. Then there's this common line that goes through to Cloverdale, and then the Roberts Bank corridor continues on, and then the other branch goes off the Interurban that goes through Newton and into the Patello Bridge.
It's an area where there's a shared piece of track.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a common piece of track.
Yeah.
So anyway, we have, and the township of Langley has about 12 to 15 trains running through that every day. Used to be, you'd have 6,000 and 7,000 foot trains. Today, they're 12 to 15,000 feet in length. So, and you're looking at a number of crossings. So you're looking at some serious traffic issues and emergency issues, safety issues. So anyway, I sent this document down to a lawyer because I'm not a lawyer. I said, does this say what I think it says? Because it was a shock to me. And it did. I sent it down to Bullhauser Tupper, our lawyers. They said absolutely. They were shocked that I got a hold of a copy of it. And so we sent it down to BC Hydro. And part of the deal was, and there was really 5 key points in the master agreement. And one that it was that that the corridor was not sold. The only thing that was sold was freight rights through the joint section and to Southern Rail for the whole corridor, and it was only freight rights. They sold the BC Hydro freight division and the rolling, which included the rolling stock and the rails. But passenger rights were preserved in perpetuity on the whole corridor, and over the joint section, it was a 21-year agreement, renewable at either party's option, between BC Hydro and the provincial government. It stated, number one, that the joint section had to be shared equally with freight, between passenger and freight. It stated that that BC Hydro had the full opportunity to use that for passenger service, for passenger traffic in and out. It also said that should double tracking be required because of the volume of freight traffic and everything else, if double tracking is required, CP Rail should double track at CP Rail's expense, totally at CP Rail's expense. And it was very detailed in terms of what it says. I've got a copy of it right here.
Yeah, I actually, in anticipation, read most of it, and I thought that was very interesting. So just to clarify, though, the section that you're talking about is about a 22-kilometer section of joint...
No, it's actually 7. It's actually 7 miles.
7 miles, okay, I'm sorry.
Kilometers.
I thought it was... so it was a section of track that you referred to it by, I forget what the names were.
It's called the joint section or the Pratt-Livingston corridor.
Pratt-Livingston corridor, that's right. So that section is covered by a master agreement between BC Hydro and presumably CP Rail that says those things.
Yeah.
That says that if it gets to a point where there needs to be double tracking, that CP would have to pay for that.
Correct.
Okay, and the other thing you said that I think is important to hear is that BC Hydro retains passenger rail rights on that right-of-way, the whole right-of-way.
Correct.
I heard you
and the whole corridor from the Patello Bridge through to Chilliwack.
Through the whole. So I don't think there's anybody in the Fraser Valley that I've ever talked to that has said the idea of pursuing rapid rail transportation in the valley is a bad idea, or finding ways to get people from Chilliwack to Surrey or beyond is a bad idea. Many people feel the interurban is the solution. Why has there been so much political controversy over what seems in many people's minds to be a kind of a no-brainer issue? Why are we 30 years later still talking about reactivating this rail line?
Well, it's a heck of a good question, but I think what really happened, so we renewed it in 2009. And remember, that 21-year agreement was due to expire August the 26th of 2009. We uncovered it in March. By the time I pulled together all of the municipalities, mayors and councils south of the river, all except for Chilliwack, I might add, but that's another story. But from Surrey, White Rock, the Langleys, Abbotsford, all joined forces with us, basically demanding BC Hydro renew this agreement, which is what we wanted. And and so that was in 2009. We renewed it 6 weeks before it was due to expire forever. If we hadn't have uncovered the master agreement in 2009, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about it today. It was gone. So CP Rail are not happy with me. I can assure you that. I know that firsthand. Because we interfered in something that they were due to take complete ownership of in a short 6 weeks.
Yeah, but apart from that, there's 20 years before 2009 and another 12 years since 2009 where there seems to be such conflict around this issue. And let me be a little more specific. There are studies that get done from time to time. The original study, I think, was called the Leawood study that was done in 2010, I believe. Yeah. And I think the regional district, Fraser Valley Regional District, had a part of their strategic planning, a section on transportation infrastructure that was done. There's a UMA study. There's a ton of different work out there. None of them can agree on what should happen with this project.
Well, I would disagree to this point. The Leawood study clearly is positive about what we're talking about.
Yes.
The two UMA studies are clearly positive about what we're talking about. There's about 2 or 3 studies before that, going back to 2006, which were questionable both in terms of their terms of reference, who conducted the study, and what they knew about passenger rail. And I could sit here and talk to you for the next 5 hours on those, but that isn't really my point.
I've read a bunch of the discussion on those particular studies, but my point is not about the studies themselves. In the current Fraser Valley Regional District Strategic Plan, it mentions and talks about rail, the reactivation of this line in the context of saying it's just not feasible. Everything they've done to look at that says you can't do it. The other studies are saying, the Leawood study as an example says, I think it's around $10 million a kilometer average cost to do the work that the Leawood study. Now that's different because it wasn't looking at what you're looking at now, which is the hydrogen fuel cells. It was looking at a diesel operation. But the work that would have to be done, they say 10 million per kilometer. There are other studies done by governments that say that's completely ridiculous. It will be $60, $70 million a kilometer. No. It just seems to recycle on and on. I've always believed the notion is absolutely correct. We have to find more environmentally safe and efficient ways of moving people around this region. But I've never been able to find any information on the cost of that people can coalesce around and say, yeah, that's the right cost. It's worth it. Let's get going.
We can justify the cost, and I could sit here and talk for the next 5 years on it, but we could justify the cost of roughly $1.3 to $1.4 billion in today's dollars. Okay, in rolling stock, in road gates, and any of the activation requirements to do it for the 99 kilometers. We can defend that and justify that. The interesting thing happened, though, Clint, I think that's what we have to look at. So, why hasn't it happened sort of up to now, and what's changed? A whole bunch of things have changed. In 2009, even when I discovered the master agreement, well, that's great, we discovered the master agreement, but it was a provincial government decision to decommission passenger rail in 1950. It's going to take a provincial government decision to commission, to reactivate the passenger corridor today. The reality is, if you looked at TransLink numbers going back to the early 2000s, 70% of trips started south of the river, ended north of the river. Today, and actually it's even more than this, but we're using this number, it's about 5 years old, 70% of the trips starting south of the river end south of the river. It's a completely different landscape today in terms of its need and necessity. The other important thing that happened was the advent of hydrogen rail. So when this happened about 2016, Alstom launched their passenger rail in Germany. It was an experimental line at the time. And so now it's in active service, paid service, and everything else. We've had Alstom out here. Alstom and us have met on 2 occasions. We've had 2 dinner meetings. It's advanced a long way. We've talked to the provincial government. We've been in active communication with the provincial government. It was in somebody that you will recall in your days in municipal politics, Derek Corrigan. And Derek Corrigan and my politics are probably like oil and water, but we sat on the Metro board together and we became pretty good friends. So I said to Derek one day, this is back in, it was long after I left office, but I kept in touch with Derek. I said, can you get me a meeting with John Horgan? This was in March of 2017, when he was just candidate Horgan. So we went downtown. We had about a 2-hour meeting with him and his provincial campaign manager. We did our Shaw documentary video. We did the maps, the whole thing. He loved the idea. A lot of things have happened since then. Obviously, they were a minority government, and now they're a majority government. One of the things that we pushed for, to go back to your point, is the whole idea. It's one thing for us to say that this is a great idea, because we obviously believe in what we're talking about and the merits of it. But what about an independent opinion? So we did 2 things. Patrick Condon, who is a UBC professor in urban development and what have you, we involved Patrick. He was in my Shaw documentary video of 2010. So he had his 16 master's students involved, 17 of them actually, involved themselves in 2 semesters. And they developed a report and a book on this whole subject. That was number 1. Number 2, we went to the provincial government and said, we need a task force or a study or something. And we worked with, I can't mention the names, but some people that had some very close contacts inside the Premier's office. And we were able to get them to announce the study in February of 2000. It was in the throne speech of last year. And the budget, following budget, had the numbers, the more detail of it. So that study, we just recently were invited to do a 3-hour presentation. We had Bill Van der Zand there, Patrick Condon.
Can I stop you right there,
Yeah.
Rick? We've got to take a quick break. I'm
Okay.
fascinated by all of this. We're going to take just a quick break, and we're going to be back after a word from our sponsor, Simpson Notaries, and we'll be back with Rick Green in just a minute.
Thank you.
We're back with my fascinating guest, Rick Green. Rick, it's such a pleasure to talk about these things. I'm sorry I had to cut you off before we went to break, but we've got to keep sponsors happy. And you were talking about the fact that finally in this process, it appears that there's going to be some kind of independent task force and study done on this, because I've followed this, as I've said, for years. And every time a community group or somebody who's passionate about this comes out with a number, with deference to TransLink, it seems TransLink comes out with another number and says, no, that's ridiculous. This is the real number. Or a local government will say, no, that's we're not supporting that. Here's the number. This is the number. I've always believed that somebody's got to get behind this and do a proper work so that we're all dealing with the same set of facts on this. I'm delighted to hear it's underway.
Yeah, we've had, so we had about a 3-hour presentation with the study group. The executive leader from Victoria was over, plus the consultant that they've hired locally, who's very, very well versed in transit issues, transit issues. And to an earlier point you made just now, one of the issues that I've had for a long time when I was on the TransLink Mayor's Council is this whole idea of we got 2 transit providers in the Lower Mainland. The Lower Mainland, if we take a look at what's happening and advancing in terms of why now, just take a look at the exponential growth out the valley. God, you people know more than as much as anybody, and we certainly do in Langley. It's just absolutely exploding. So people are moving out here. There's a whole new philosophy in terms of people going to be working from home and what are they going to do and how they're going to get from here to there. So we made this presentation to this group. So that study is well underway. There is just a million reasons why. It's the exponential growth in terms of development, house prices and everything else, affordable housing as well. People will say one of the arguments is, well, you know, this interurban, it sort of winds its way through the valley. And my point is, that's exactly the point. The interurban, if you look at the history, going back to 1906, 1910, the interurban opened up the Fraser Valley. It's responsible for that. I mean, in years gone by, they were bringing milk and vegetables and produce into the old farmers market in New Westminster. I mean, that was the principle behind it. Now, with the advent of the ALR, take a look at what, you know, when we start talking about, well, you know, we should have, a rapid rail coming in from the valley. Well, where are you going to put it? And my whole point has been and I have to tell you, Clint, I'm not coming from this to this from as some kind of an old train nut, with the greatest respect to train nuts. I don't mean it that way. But the reality is I've been on a train twice in my life, but that's neither here nor there. Take a look at the problem we've got in the Fraser Valley, in the entire Lower Mainland. You got BC Transit, who have a mandate to look after their region. You got TransLink with a mandate to look after their region, and I know firsthand, after pounding the table at the TransLink Mayor's Council, they are not interested in anything outside of Metro Vancouver. Simple as that. We need interregional transit, interregional transportation. That's what it's going to take. When people start talking to me about, well, you know, we're going to widen Highway 1. Well, yeah, Highway 1 is going to be widened. There's no question about that. We know that. Well, I was involved in the inviting the Ministry of Transportation over because of the 216th interchange that was just recently finished. So that was in about 2010, 2011. So the planning was underway from that point to 2017 and started construction, and it just opened. If you extrapolate the time and cost for that length of a road from 202 to 216th, and you go from 216th to Chilliwack, if all budgets aligned, all governments agreed, all partnership agreements were in place, and it didn't stop until it was finished, you couldn't finish it physically until 2051.
Yeah, you and I won't be here to see that. And,
that's right.
And it's interesting that you don't even know the numbers of the roads that are out here, because nobody from out that way seems to even know we exist when it comes to transit and transportation financing. You would know how much work it is to get money to get overpasses built over roads that you don't even own.
Well, you know, and to that, Clint, I have to tell you, for the road widening that the Township of Langley just committed to 264th, yep, which is now, they say it's going to be finished by 2025. There's no way it's going to be finished by 2025. Nevertheless, they're putting $46 million into this.
I read that, and I thought I must have been reading it wrong, that now we get the pleasure of paying for roads we don't own.
That's right.
As municipalities, not just the overpasses that go over them that are made necessary because the road is there. we're talking about stuff that is pretty exciting with that interurban connection, especially when you relate it back to the 1900s in Chilliwack and moving forward. There's a lot of people that are still around whose families used that, as you said. One of the challenges that I fear with opening up the valley, as you say, is we're fighting this wave of population as it is today. And so many of those folks are living here and working in Vancouver. And we know, you know, and I know all the work that we do to build complete and sustainable communities. That goes against what we're trying to do in terms of building communities. How do we maintain a sense of community in a place like Chilliwack and have people live and work here? How does a rapid transit into through the valley help us do that?
Okay, there's where I wanted to correct the argument. What we're talking about as far as the interurban is concerned is community rail, not commuter rail. West Coast Express is commuter rail. It's from Mission to downtown Vancouver, relatively straight line with about 5 or 6 stops. If you take a look at the interurban, we're talking about 16 communities, cities, towns, 14 post-secondary institutions, Abbotsford Airport. We're talking about moving people around south of the Fraser. What are the options? And this is my argument, was my argument when I was in the mayor's office. What are our options to be able to move people south of the Fraser other than Highway 1?
Yeah,
I've yet to have anybody come to me and give me another option. So we can do 2 things. As I say, we're not against widening Highway 1. It's going to happen over time. But the growth of the valley is far exceeding any capacity that Highway 1 could possibly handle or manage.
It's exceeding it now between Chilliwack and
no
Langley.
question. Yeah, no question.
It is completely out of.
You know, and I understand what you're saying. You know, it's that, you know, people get comfortable in a community and say, well, we got 20,000 people here and we can't take any more. Well, good luck with that in today's world.
I'm not suggesting that we want to put limits on growth. That's not my point. My point is I'd like to be able to make sure that we balance that growth with jobs for those folks that live here so that they don't have to commute to earn a living, because we know how a community can hollow out in the daytime with everybody leaving to go
Absolutely.
somewhere else and trying
that.
to come back at night. My examples come from, and did some work and study in the area of San Francisco, where you have the BART system, which is probably one of the best people movers on the planet. But that system created a number of satellite communities that simply exist to house people and have very limited ability for people to live and work there. They're simply satellite bedrooms for this huge hub that's San Francisco. And those communities today are now saying, how can we become more sustainable? So it's not a question anybody can answer right now. It's just, if we don't bear that in mind, in my opinion, we have to be very careful.
I think your point's well taken, and what I would suggest, one of the best answers to that we've found is the Patrick Condon study that was done, and the book that he produced. It's online. You can access it even through our website.
I've actually read it,
and it's about building sustainable communities. Yeah. So it's very important to, and I agree with you. I mean, we've got to get this out of our head in terms of how we've been running our communities in the past.
Well, I'm really excited to learn that there's movement of everybody pulling in the same direction to find out how we can make this happen in a way that's cost effective and makes sense and builds strong communities, et cetera, et cetera. Where is BC Hydro in all of this? I mean, they're a standalone Crown Corporation. They're self-financing. They don't take orders from the government per se. But it would seem to me that if they were looking at this and saying, you know, we'd really like to get back in the passenger rail business, this would have been done. Well, what's their position?
I mean, effectively, what we're talking about, BC Hydro is the BC government. Bill Vanderzam, and Bill wanted to get involved, and that's why we invited Bill, and Bill is a special advisor. It was his government that BC Hydro came to them. They wanted to sell the whole corridor. They wanted to sell everything back in 1988. Bill and his minister of the day, Jack Davis, said, no, absolutely not. We'll sell freight rights and whatever, but we got to protect it for potential passenger use. It is well known that these corridors existed all over North America. Yeah. What makes us very unique is the fact that ours wasn't sold. Most of these corridors were sold for development because it was back in the 50s, in the advent of the car, the bigger cars, the superhighways, and everything else. They wanted to get rid of these corridors so the rail wouldn't come back. It wasn't in their interest to have that happen. So I think that the ideas are great. John Horgan, when he announced the widening of Highway 1 to 264th back in, I think it was the year before last, I think it was 2020, on the side of Highway 1, unscripted, it was in his script, that he wanted to look at, and they were very interested in reactivating the Interurban. So it's certainly on the government radar. The government are in control of what they do with those hydro rights. Hydro, they can turn around and say, well, okay, who's going to run this corridor? They could go to Southern Rail and say, would you run the passenger service for us? Yep. They could do a number of different things, but no different than West Coast Express. Yep. West Coast Express was a creation of the NDP government back in the 90s.
Yep. And certainly, I know lots of people that have taken advantage of it, and it's provided a really valuable way for people to move around. Rick, I hate to say goodbye because it's just been fascinating. And what this means is I'm going to have to bring you back, and we're going to have to keep in touch on this issue. As I say, it's like it's been in the wind for 30 years or more around this community. I think since 1950, when the rail service was ended, people have talked about reactivation. And the good news is we have track right to downtown Chilliwack, so we can certainly accommodate that. So I want to take this opportunity to say thanks for the stories about Langley. I really appreciate knowing a little more history about the amalgamation issue. Please say that you'll come back so we can talk more railway.
Love to.
Just like a couple of old railway coots, but we're not. Anyway, thanks. So my guest today was Rick Green, and Rick, as I've said, is a former mayor and now an advocate for the revival of passenger service on the historic Interurban line. As always, if you've got any questions or comments on the show, send us an email. And thanks again to our sponsor, Simpson Notaries, and special thanks to Rick, and a thank you to you for watching Hames Hot Mic.